Welcome to CaCo Talks, the weekly podcast where conversations about life, hot topics, mental health, and more take center stage. We are your hosts, Catelyn and Courtney Geiger.
Together, we explore thought-provoking discussions with an ambient vibe that inspires open and honest dialogue. So sit back, relax, and join us for some insightful conversation that will leave you feeling informed and inspired.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to CaCo Talks. Tonight, we are discussing eugenics, as well as this pro-natalist movement that I happened to come across recently about a group of tech billionaires who have kind of taken upon themselves to fix the declining birth rate issue. I just found that really interesting. It definitely brings up a lot of, new questions about not only the economy, but where our family structures, family units, all of that are headed in the coming years. So, excited to talk about this, Catelyn?
Yeah, this is a very interesting conversation, which I guess, Courtney, you can take us into this, but reading that article was just kind of I feel like we're playing with fire here, so.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. So let's start out actually by discussing the article. I really found this through Twitter. I follow screenwriting Twitter, and somebody was saying they give out daily prompts of you can write this scene based on news articles and stuff. And so I happened to scroll through and I saw this and I was like, this is really interesting. And it actually sounds like something I was not exactly something, but something I kind of started writing. Mm-hmm. Characters I started writing. So I was like, let me get into this. And then I shared it with Catelyn, and I was like, this is really interesting. We should talk about this on the podcast because it gets into more than just these kooky characters. It's really a serious, debate you could have. So basically what it is this group, this family, these two tech executives, so they're pretty high up in the tech chain. I'm not sure what company they work for, but I want to say they work for several different tech companies, so maybe Google, Apple, that kind of stuff. Big corporations, multinational corporations. And they've kind of taken it upon themselves to have multiple children as a way to combat the declining birth rate. So I think they are freezing their eggs. The woman's freezing her eggs, and they're birthing these children over time, and they want to have 8 or 9 or something like that. Mm-hmm. Down the line. And so they are, but they're doing it kind of systematically as a way to, I guess, redirect declining birth rates, because as we all know, the birth rates have been declining for years now, mm-hmm. just due to things like women's education and women working in the workforce, changing family dynamics, as well as lack of maternal health care and paid maternity leave, all that kind of stuff, and even paternity leave, and just the rising costs of everything. People are not having children as much as they used to, or average people are not having children as much as they used to. But so countries are having to adopt these what they call pro-natalist policies, which, if you don't know what pro-natalist means, is exactly what it sounds. It's like encouraging people to have births or to give birth. They're governmental policies that make it easier, more appealing, I guess, or incentivizes people to have children. I just thought that was really interesting that it's these very elitist, high-powered tech people, mm-hmm. who have decided we're going to have 8, 9 children, have major, massive families that can basically, once those children grow up, they can have 8, 9 children, and then we can mm-hmm. repopulate the earth that way. It brings into question a lot of ethical questions, and Catelyn and I had a really good conversation about it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what did you think when I first read the article and kind of, some of the ideas that I was discussing with you?
Well, I think that there's nothing wrong with people wanting to have children. So first thing, do that, and luckily this couple can likely afford it to have multiple children, because I think the article said they hope to have 7 kids or something like that in total. Mm-hmm. But I think the problem is they kind of have this God complex of I'm going to single-handedly kind of populate the world, which is the premise behind pro-natalist, right? Of like, we have to keep the human race going, so I'm going to be the one to take on that task, is the bizarre thing to me. And then also the fact that they have participated in like genetic testing and embryo selection to ensure their children won't be things like obese or dealing with anxiety. And to me, those are things that environmentally kind of shape your children. Not necessarily something that you just go and genetically choose. I can see maybe obesity more than like anxiety, I guess. This world unfortunately kind of breeds anxiety that we live in America, especially. So it's just interesting. More than anything, I think that it just gives me like chip on my shoulder, very like wealthy type of movement, because let's be honest, beyond just having children, that there's a high cost associated with each child, on top of the privilege in having the ability to pick, whether your kid can be prevented from having obesity or experiencing anxiety. It's a very elitist thing. And I don't know. I guess like the hard thing is like, do you take that away from somebody that wants to choose that, or should that person still be able to do that just because they have the access to wealth? When there's so many other humanity issues that are going on in the States, like why would you want to have children? But in their scenario, in their defense, they have the money and the access to provide their kids things that most people won't be able to provide. So it's definitely interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think the fact that this is being taken on in some ways by this select group of individuals makes it that much more exclusive. Yeah. It's like, it's kind of like the people out here who drive, McLarens. They're all in the McLaren club, And it's like, we can afford McLarens. We can afford 4, 5, 6 McLarens because we have the kind of money to be able to do that. And believing that somehow the McLarens will save, the rest of the car production for all of humanity. You know what I mean? Like, it's that kind of idea that I think misses, unfortunately, the point of what the declining birth rate does really signify, which is that it won't just be a certain group of people who will be wiped off the face of the earth. It'll be minority groups gone. Yeah, exactly. It'll be, like the workforce will not be able to replenish itself, which I'm not exactly angry about that, I guess. But there's these other wider implications that go beyond your elitist circle,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what you have the privilege of not having to think about these things from the standpoint of not being a minority, let alone not having to struggle, because even if you came from a previous household of having to struggle, but at this point you no longer have to struggle. So let's be honest in that and say that your kids will not have to struggle, most likely, right? And there's a different lifestyle that those kids will be living. And those kids, especially the first 7, if they're not like trying to single-handedly populate the world, the first 7 will likely not have to struggle, Yeah. Somewhere down the line, if you think you're going to single-handedly populate the world, then somebody's going to have to be working class. So at that point, then it's like there's some level of privilege that's no longer going to exist for what you're trying to do. And let's be honest, all of this is created out of thinking that your privilege is still going to exist. Yeah. It's like, I just feel like their whole idea is like, we'll continue to perpetuate what we know in the lifestyle that we live, as that's like the standard for everyone. In reality, is we don't live in an equal world where opportunity or resources are distributed equitably among people. I think actually if resources were already distributed equitably, we wouldn't have so much of probably this birthing issue.
Like the reason a lot of people are not having kids is because they cannot afford to do so.
Yeah, cannot afford
that's
it.
a big.
I think even the emotional burden and the toll that it takes on an individual. I think that there is usually not an equal distribution of caretaking when it comes to children. So that makes it even more difficult when you're still expected to go out and get a job and work, a 9-to-5, pursue your own passions and career goals and things like that. And so it's just like the benefits of having children are truly not there anymore. There's really no incentive either. I mean, life is just, I work a full-time job and it's barely comfortable for me to just take care of myself. I couldn't imagine throwing a kid in there.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, you need to have sustainable governmental policies that can really look at all aspects of life when making these decisions about the population birth rate increasing or decreasing or whatever. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think there has to be like a systemic change in governmental policies, I think, before people start just like, oh, yeah, I'm going to have a kid. And for several reasons, I think that, there's, like I said, it's so expensive. Like something simple as like childcare, right? If you expect me to work, have this white picket fence house and a home, 2.5 kids in the burbs, then something's going to have to give,
Yeah,
while
definitely.
You're still not paying equitable wages to support said lifestyle on top of that. But the cost of like a home is going up. Daycare costs the same amount as a home, sometimes even more, depending on when you got your house. So it's just like the basic things are just not there.
It's like the world is getting less and less conducive to having a child, yet they're saying like,
have kids.
Oh, the birth rate's declining, have one. And it's like, okay, so the child's going to come into what world? And you're not offering very many resources to take care of the child, you know? And actually, I'm reading in this article right now, I think this is an economist, his name's Baha or something. This is on the National Post. He's saying that really the issue here is we should be less concerned about, declining birth rates and creating this kind of like hysteria around like, oh, there's not enough babies being born, and really worrying about the potential for overpopulation and the, straining of the resources we do already have on Earth. Like the population is already, we're like over consuming what the Earth has to give. So why would we add more,
Yeah, for real.
So, and I'm thinking that's a really good way to look at it too. And he's saying that it really is kind of this whole, he's calling it depopulation alarmism. So like raising alarm about the population declining, calling that a form of reproductive coercion, basically that reduces women to birth vessels for political, religious, and nationalist agendas. Like the idea that like, and I can definitely see
anyway, that. So,
what'd you say? Say that again.
We've already been moving in that direction anyway. So,
yeah, it's kind of like this weird conservative, like nationalist pushback of like, we need more babies that look like, certain types of babies that can do certain types of, you know what I mean? Instead of looking at
what always gets me too is like who is truly concerned about that, or like the group of individuals who are always concerned about we're not having enough babies. It's always some big business person, CEO, person, with large amounts of wealth typically. When your commoner is worried about how am I going to eat tomorrow, So it's just a very like,
or like how would I feed a child, or like the practical
it's like a first
day-to-day
world problem, like it's very like, okay, but there's other big, and I think part of that is also your perception of what you're experiencing, sure, but I think that's when you have to humble yourself and be empathetic to other people's plights and situations and life experiences. Just because your life is not going to be how somebody else's is going to be. On top of, not everybody can be rich. It would not work. If we were all rich, we would all be poor. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
$1 million would not get you the same place that it gets you, which it doesn't now. But $1 million wouldn't get you the same place if we all had it. You wouldn't want it, right?
Agreed.
So this only works for the rich people in actuality, just because part of this helps the rich stay rich because they hopefully raise the next generation to also be rich. And they don't have to worry about the other things, like how much it costs to raise a kid. Do I want to put my kid in private school, public school? You don't have to worry about those things because you have the money to afford those things and to afford 7 children. I don't know anybody that has 7 kids just because, and they're poor. They usually have to have a decent job.
Exactly.
At least 6
I just
figures.
think it's really, agreed. I think it's really interesting. Like back in the day, it used to be a very poor mentality to have
that many kids,
8, 9 kids, because like when people were working agriculturally, it was like we need hands.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was a labor source for them, so they would have children, right? And so that was a very poor man's or working to lower class man's idea. Like rich people were the ones with 2 kids, right? Because there was no need. They weren't doing physical labor. They were already part of a not gentrified, but they were already part of a specialized class of people, elitist class of people who were going to be intellectual more than anything, right? So they weren't having 8, 9 kids. But now it's almost like this reversal of that due to, I think, technological shifts, as well as things probably like birth control and more working class women getting educated. Those sort of like population dynamic shifts that are allowing that it's become a luxury to have children now. Yeah,
that's ridiculous though.
Which I think is so interesting is like, this is really late stage capitalism, y'all. Like,
Facts.
It is now a luxury to even reproduce at this point.
Ridiculous.
It feels like that.
It's really ridiculous.
The most kind of, I don't want to say natural, but like, I guess it is the most natural, one of the most natural things that human beings can do is reproduce, right? But now that has a price tag that only certain people can afford. And then it's almost like a status symbol, like, oh, I can have 8 kids.
Pretty much.
Because I can afford to have 8 kids. Just like, oh, I can have 8 Bugattis. I can afford 8 Bugattis,
I don't really know how that's
I can afford 8 children.
Kids are like a huge responsibility.
It's not really a flex. I'm saying capitalistically, it feels like that's what it's getting to, is like, if you value that whole American life system of like family and all that, it's like, it's becoming, I can buy this, you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just another form of like capitalism taking part. Because, I mean, it costs thousands of dollars to even birth a child in a hospital.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, you can go bankrupt just physically having a child. Yeah,
and even like, because like the group of patients that I work with, even that, like, it's like the possibility of that outcome is like, you don't even take that into consideration,
Exactly.
So it's just very, very interesting to me that it's just like, that's your concern. There's so many other bigger problems. There's just so many other problems.
Yeah. And I think we're not giving that like, the environment is a pressing issue, because it's like he was saying, Baha, I'm saying his name wrong. It's in the National Post if you look this up. But the scientist was basically saying, like, the real issue here is like, we're overextending the resources that Earth has right now. Like, we already have, billions and billions of children who are facing pollution and food insecurity.
Yeah.
And all kinds of other issues.
The amount of like homeless individuals. Homeless individuals, homeless children in the foster care system. And it's like, you're trying to single-handedly populate the world when those kids aren't even being taken care of.
Exactly.
Like, it's just giving very elitist, very first world problem.
And it's, and it's giving, it's not even a problem. It's something that's like a made up, cause you've decided to take on. It's like this group of elitist people because you have the resources to do so. It's like, it's weird. It's kind of giving me like Great Gatsby in a weird way. Like, you know how they were like on this little island and they were like, we'll just throw our massive parties and totally like ignore the fact that there's suffering going on right outside our door. We'll just have this little enclave of people who just have this grand old time because we can afford to do so, and everybody else is just suffering, but whatever. Come drink the champagne, you know?
Right?
Like,
yeah. Very weird.
It feels very like that. And, you know, there's also an argument that this is kind of eugenicist, which if you guys don't know, let me define eugenics for you. I'm going to get a real definition, so I'm going to look it up real quick. It's basically the study of how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable traits that are desirable. So it's the idea of like,
white is right.
It's sort of that white is right. It's a very conservative nationalist idea. It's actually kind of what like groups like the KKK believe in, is the idea of like, we are a desirable race, so all other races need to get be cleared or gotten rid of so that our traits show up the most and we reproduce and we have this stronghold. It's also a Naziist idea. That's what like the genocide was for the Holocaust. That was a eugenicist idea of like, we use reproduction as a method to control desirable traits that come out in the human population. So we'll get rid of those who are undesirable, even if that means force. It's a really very deeply problematic, racist, often idea. It's very, very problematic. And actually, I'll finish reading this. It says, it was developed largely by Sir Francis Galton as a method of improving the human race. Eugenics was increasingly discredited as unscientific and racially biased during the 20th century, especially after the adoption of its doctrines by the Nazis in order to justify their treatment of Jews, disabled people, and other minority groups. So it's not unfair to associate eugenics with the Holocaust, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, that's really kind of what their plan was, because their whole idea was like the Aryan race needs to exist as the main. This is the strongest, most desirable traits anyone could possibly have. So, yeah. So we got to get rid of like defective people. Yeah. And some people are arguing that this pro-natalist movement among like tech billionaires and really wealthy tech people is a eugenicist idea because they're trying to continue their own lineage along and using even like artificial means of reproduction to do that.
Yeah, but that's exactly what this couple gives me. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like a new age. I'm not calling them a new age Nazi, but it's like this self-righteous way of being like, our lineage needs to continue and others don't. You know? Or if you have enough money to reproduce, then we're producing more elite people.
Right? It's just giving very like, we don't want our kind to go away.
Exactly.
So we're going to like do everything possible to make sure we ensure our existence. And it's just like, first of all, the way nature works, baby, if nature doesn't want you to be here, you won't. Let me make that clear. So, y'all keep on trying now. Okay. Y'all saw what happened to the dinosaurs. Y'all next.
And I also think it feels very anti-feminist as well. In a way.
It gave me Handmaid's Tale vibes.
Yeah, it kind of is like that. You know, even though I think Handmaid still has more religious overtones. Yeah. But it is a conservative idea and a kind of religious idea of like birthing, continuing the lineage and continuing birthing for like generations and generations to come, like kind of like pre-planning generations instead of just allowing things to happen, you know? Yeah. Yeah, which is a very, it's you can see that in all kinds of religious ideologies. It's not even just a Christian ideology. Lots of religion holds that belief that like this needs to continue, and we need to have lots of kids and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, just to go back to the feminist thing, it's It's the idea that women need to be active members in reproducing constantly, right? Because this relies on women to reproduce, right? So when we talk about gender dynamics and the way things are set up now, we know that the bulk of childbearing and child rearing is responsibility of women, right? And has been domestic labor historically. So what would that mean? And unfortunately, we all know society is not caught up to the idea of equal partnership in relationships. At least not widely. It's not widely accepted. Same way some other things have gone. So we know that when these children are being born, it would be women mainly doing the lion's share of the labor to raise these children.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus the men who we're assuming that they're trying to, who they're in these relationships with would be not so much. So it's sort of, I just see these pro-natalist things as honestly sort of a form of oppression for women too, to be honest.
Yeah, I can see that.
It really is. It's definitely skirting on that issue. And then you can get into even things like the anti-abortion bills and stuff being kind of proto-natalist. Like, we're not going to allow you to have abortions in the event of things like rape or incest or whatever. Or like, you're not allowed to have abortions past a certain number of weeks. It's still getting at that idea of like reproduction needs to be controlled and kind of arranged. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's just getting very forced.
Yeah.
Very forced. Which is surprising that a woman is, because most of the time I think, like men are kind of leading the way on like abortions, and Elon Musk is apparently a supporter of the pro-natalist movement. And so it's just, I guess it was just like, that a woman is doing this. And she has which I wonder if, I guess it's like their business as a whole, right? But I wonder like who started this conversation, Like I wish we had more context from like, how did this start? How did we get here? Why did we get here? How are you raised? And things like that, because yeah, like I said, there's a certain population of people that are concerned about this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like very odd. It's almost otherworldly when you really think about it. In a weird way. It's sort of like I could see things progressing to this, but it definitely feels like the step in the wrong direction. It does not feel like it doesn't feel like that's gonna fix anything. It feels like it's gonna make 10 more problems arise.
I can see that.
Because we know they're not taking into account what the birthing process would be like for the average woman, or
if you can get to birth,
Yeah, if you can even get to birth, and then taking into account women of color have higher death rates when it comes to not infant mortality, but what is it called? Is it like, I think it's fatality rates?
Yeah,
maternal fatality rates or something like that. Where you die in childbirth, like that's been recorded. That kind of stuff. So it definitely feels like in their mind it makes sense, and I can see it making sense in their mind, because really there's no reason for them not to reproduce.
Sure.
They're not worrying about if they can feed Johnny, Ellen, Sue, Rachel, Ron, and whatever.
They have some interesting names for their kids too, honestly.
Right? The name like Stardust.
No, I'm talking about this couple specifically.
Stardust Alpha. What'd you say?
I'm talking about this couple specifically.
Do you know the names of their kids?
Yeah, they have an article. It's like Titan, Thorntonus or something like that. It's very like
New Agey.
Not even New Agey. They like try to like put a New Age twist on like I guess like men of power names, like Titan, something like that.
Like Greek god names?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like classical names?
Yeah, like Greek god, I would say closest.
That's very odd. Yeah, it feels like an episode of like Black Mirror mixed with Twilight Zone, mixed with like,
or like the Sherman Show.
Yeah. It feels like that because once you get into the idea of the government, I don't want to say government, but like these organizations kind of conscripting and forcing births or arranging things, it feels like you're playing nature and you're playing God.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
It's like you're playing with fire.
Yeah, you're playing with something that's not really, that's supposed to correct itself if there is an issue, or that is supposed to just exist naturally because, you know, they're stepping in with their like facts and figures and technological advancements that allow them to kind of redirect a natural course of things. And so it gets very odd, frankly, you know?
Yeah, I just think that's just like it's just an area to me personally you just don't play with. And who's to say that like say you are messing with genetics, right? For example, that the other side of that is you don't know what you're going to get either, you know? Like you're over here playing in genetics, but genetics are also changing as we continue through life and we experience different environments
and adapting,
different stressful events, adapting, growing up, different, what are those things called? What are they called?
Isn't it like environmental stimuli?
Yeah, like even cancer-causing agents. There's a word for that. I just can't think of it. Carcinogens. Yeah.
Carcinogens.
So, you know, it's just like you think you're doing what's best for your child, but are you really? Are you really? Because, you know, the gene that may cause or I guess helps with anxiety could be the gene that protects your kids from carcinogens. You just do not know. So
you really don't. And like people have been trying to map the human genome and like figure it out for like decades now. And it's still one of those things that's like totally up to chance. That's like part of what makes humanity and like life what it is that it's left up to chance. You know? And I think like, you know, this isn't a new concept. We all know like genetic alteration, there's implications, and even, you know, they're having conversations about how far is too far with AI now and ChatGPT, all that. So we know that we've had continue to have these conversations, but it's like they keep cropping up in different ways. And now it's like with birth and reproduction and, you know, populations. So, yeah, it's just, it's concerning, really kind of scary, and it feels unnatural.
Very.
Yeah, I had something else to say when you said something about the carcinogens and genetic chance. I don't remember now. It was really good. I'll remember it later.
So, like, if you had, say you were in the same position as these individuals, as a minority figure, right? What would you do?
Like, my financial status was still the same.
No, so you are you just happen to be a minority in their situation.
I mean, I think minorities having multiple children is always unfortunately looked down upon, regardless if you have money or not. I think it always is stereotyped as like, oh, they're just basically laying up and having babies, right? Which is always, and then you can tie that to how people already see Black women as like hypersexualized and like see the Black women as like lax mothers who don't know how to, you know, that kind of thing. So I think it gets into that stereotype. I don't think that's ever missed. But I can't see myself just from a logistics standpoint really looking and saying, I'm going to just have multiple children to like repopulate the earth. I don't see myself doing that. Facts. And that's less to do with race and minority status than just straight up logic. Like, we're not playing God, you know?
Yeah. And I think too that like, on the other end of that, because me and Courtney obviously we're multiples in a different aspect, but we are multiple. So how, logistically speaking, like, are you going to be able to care for those 7 children on an emotional level, you know?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say earlier, actually. Now, I'm glad you brought that up. It's because I was like, 8 children, like, yes, you might be able to physically afford them, but the way that child rearing works now, can you even devote enough time to 8 children in your lifetime as an adult human? Can you devote proper attention that it takes to take care of one child? Can you give that to 8 children? Really? No matter how much money you have. And that's another issue, you know, because we see people even like lesser people like Nick Cannon or like Kiki White. I'm trying to think who else. Somebody else has like 8 kids or something like that. I forgot. Young, some rapper. Anyway, so you could call them pro-natal. Yeah, right. You could call them pro-natalist too. They popping out kids left and right, right? But that's seen very differently, frankly.
Oh yeah.
Than this group here who of like elitist, frankly, white people who are really doing the same thing. You know? And I'm not saying that there aren't different logistics and different, like, you know, because we also know there's like the whole baby mama thing or baby daddy thing, whatever. But as far as having multiple children as a way to keep your lineage going, that's basically what these groups are doing. You know?
For sure. I don't know.
You know, I
don't even support like the Nick Cannons of the world, so and they ain't sure don't support Bethany and John, you know?
Right? I just think too, like we immediately question Nick Cannon for having children. Like, you cannot possibly be a present father. You cannot possibly.
But he isn't though. Like, we can confirm that.
And I agree. I think that's probably true. He has probably confirmed that he can't be. But then that also means this couple can't either. Like, keep the same energy just racially, because I think we immediately are like, the black people cannot do it. They won't be able to do it. Versus the white people, can they do it? You know,
right?
And I'm not saying
right. So
yeah, I'm just saying we're not keeping the same energy. Or like, I mean, it's the same thing for the Kardashians. All those girls have had babies out of wedlock.
Oh, they're not baby mamas though.
Yeah, but they're not seen as baby mamas.
Yeah, they don't consider.
And they've had multiple children. They've all had multiple children.
But they call their black baby daddies.
Yeah, and they move them from like, they jump from man to man to man to man to man. Okay, any other woman that would be seen as whorish. Sorry, say what you want. But like, that's what those women do. And I'm not trying to shame them for it. I'm just saying, like, racially, that's how people are looking at these things. You know? And so, you know, that brings into question, like, okay, well, there are black people who have hella kids. Or even just people with lower income who have hella kids, but it's like celebrated and demonized for different racial groups. And I feel like with this elitist group coming in, being like, we're going to have 8 kids and 11 kids and repopulate the earth. It's like, it's really interesting that I'm like, who gets the right to reproduce in the first place? You know, or who gets to reproduce without stigma attached to it?
Seriously.
You know? Because if I had a child right now today on my own as a woman, you know, even if I can afford the child, there's a different stigma that I would be walking in the world in just because I'm a black woman raising a child as a single mom.
Oh yeah, for sure. Versus
and I can have all the money in the world.
Did the same thing, it would be like, oh, it would probably be not as frowned upon.
Yeah, it's seen very differently. Very differently. You know? Even, you know, how we look at, when you think about in movies, a single mom, when it's a white single mom versus a black single mom, those are 2 different representations.
Oh, yeah.
Oftentimes. Yeah. It's not seen as this horribly negative, like, stigma or indicative of her character when she's a white single mom. Because a lot of times, especially in like culture, white single moms will go get married to somebody else, move from this person to that person. Like, they see it as this kind of like agency thing that they have, you know. Versus when we see representations of black single moms, it is very much they wear like a scarlet letter because of it, and they're marked as undesirable forever now, you know.
Seriously.
So it's just interesting to look at the politics of reproduction, but also how people who decide they're going to, you know, take it into their own hands, how they decide what stigmas follow them and what don't. You know, and the fact that they even have decided to create a little group of elitists who do this shows that they don't even feel the stigma of it. Because they think it's something to celebrate. It's like the good time, you know?
Seriously.
But yeah, what about, I want to ask you the same question you asked me. I think you would handle if you were like had all the resources, all the money to be a part of this elitist group, and then you have children.
I think what I would do is if I had decided to have kids, even if I was wealthy, I would only have the kids that I feel like I could emotionally take care of. Because I think especially a lot of your like rich kids, they're often, because parents are working, I guess, and mom is too concerned with like maybe shopping or different things, that those kids oftentimes get left and lost behind and end up getting raised by like said nanny or whoever else. And so they come up and they have their own issues. And that's why I say like these people are selecting genetics for these children. And it's like, but are you raising them? Like environment plays a huge factor in this, you know, you not being a present parent because you're working all the time or whatever you're doing, can play a factor in making a child anxious, period.
Most definitely.
And we're not making
Childhood
a robot.
real.
We're making a human that's supposed to go out into society and put forth an effort to be a productive citizen, right? So it's just
Most
like,
definitely.
it is odd. But anyways, to answer the question, I would have the kids that I have the emotional capacity to handle. And if I know that I don't have the emotional capacity to handle said children or even the time, I think in that scenario, I would even stray further away from having kids because I wouldn't have the time to really like pour into my children. And I say that from a standpoint of like having a mother who raised us, who didn't always have the time, but she always made time. So I want to implement those things into how I raise my kids. And if I'm not able to do that on a consistent basis like she was, I don't want to do it at all. So to be honest, I would probably lean more to not having children, just because I think that when you're in a space of on that caliber, a lot of times it requires a lot of your time and energy and in efforts to the business. It's like your baby. So that's what
Most
I would
definitely.
say.
Yeah, it takes, I think the multiples take out ironically enough, what they're trying to do is create more people, right? For like stronger bonds and like a stronger society or whatever. And they're thinking about this on a macro level when it's like, what about the intimate personal level of having children? Like, what can you emotionally handle?
I hope they do like a sociology project or something like on this. Because I want to know how these kids are going to turn out. And when it comes to, you know, things like society and the roles that they choose and how they choose to contribute back, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. And then you get into like, we all know like ranking order is important in a family, right? So like, you know, imagine your child 6, 7, 8. Like, and you know, you're kind of like a part of this like scheme. I don't want to say scheme, but this plan to like repopulate Earth. Yeah. Like, it takes out the spontaneity and individuality, I think, in some ways of your life.
It makes a kid like a robot. Like you're just here to serve a purpose. Yeah. Like go serve your purpose. And it's like the kid has emotions and feelings and thoughts and opinions. You know,
there's nuance. There's like nuance to bringing a life into the world, and that's why I think it should be bringing a life into the world should be considered deeply. It should be considered for a while, and it shouldn't be something you know, feel like you have to check off a list. Because I think that's how children have been born historically, is people feeling like they needed to like get married and have a kid. It's like, just check it off. It needs thought put into it, even on that level. But then
that's
the flip
threat
side
to
is
America too, is that people put more thought into it. They're like critically thinking about having children.
Oh yeah, and it's preventing people from doing it in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's why I was saying like just more education about what the effects of having a child, like childhood trauma, even, you know, depression, postpartum depression. Like, we're so much more aware of the intricacies of what it takes to have a child now. People aren't just getting married at 18 and then having sex for the first time and then, oh, I'm pregnant. That's how people did stuff in like the 50s and 60s, you know? That's really how a lot of kids were born. And there was not as much thought put into like, okay, where's this child going to go to school? What kind of lifestyle do I want them to live? How am I going to be fortified as a parent to give them the emotional, you know, secure attachments that they need? You know, financially, how I'm going to do this. It's like, now we think about being prepared for children, I think, versus back then it was, oh, just have them and figure it out. Like the child is going to bring you happiness and joy and immense,
Seriously.
whatever. Versus now we're thinking, I have to bring something to this kid.
Mm-hmm.
Am I ready for this child
to
give them what they need? And I think those are very different questions we're asking
Seriously.
now than our parents and grandparents did. And then we've had plenty of conversations on our podcast about dealing with childhood trauma, and it's like, to be honest, a lot of it stems from the nature of their parents' relationship and their frankly unpreparedness to have children. So imagine we just willingly bring 8 kids into this world. That's doing that 8 times, 10 times, 11 times. It's like, you got to consider these things. I think it's better to have 1 kid when you're ready to have it than have 8 kids just to have them. You know what I mean? So, yeah, and I think that's really what they're combating now is people are aware, people are waking up and realizing and getting more educated, and even things like TikTok or whatever are telling people, like, be aware of what you're doing before you do it. And that's stopping people from just replenishing, I guess, willy-nilly, Yeah, so I don't know. It could, frankly, I definitely don't think that could be me. Just because I think there's so many more issues that come up versus just, I want to have this kid. I'm going to make it like a little designer baby. I'm going to make the kind of kid I want to have, Like, no, you don't get to just walk into a store and choose which kid you're going to like. It's not like the new, Fendi bag
right?
or like
it's
whatever,
not like you just go to the store and you just have a designer baby, pick it off the shelf kind of thing. It's just giving very odd to me.
Yeah. It's definitely concerning, and I'm hoping, I think this is a very small group of people, but I do find them fascinating because this isn't even like a governmental push, at least not in America. There are other governments I was reading that have instituted policies, like Japan did a policy called fertility and sterility, where they're trying to get the general public they were providing fertility treatments for couples and stuff. And so they were trying to institute government policies to like get people to have more children. But I'm going to be honest, I don't even think that kind of stuff is going to persuade people too much anymore. Nice. Just because people understand the real implications and they realize that the government is not raising this baby, I am. So, people are very cautious about stepping into that stuff now. And I think people don't have this full faith in the government too much anymore either. So I think really, I don't see this whole like replenishing scheme coming to full fruition, I guess. You know what I mean?
Agreed. Yeah.
And people are just in general worried about the future. We're like, we're not even sure we were going to really survive like that. Why would we bring somebody else in here, So I think that's another thing to contend with is like there's so much anxiety around the future in general. It's like people they're not trying to bring a new life into this world to be concerned about in the time being, So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we're going to have a lot more childless people. I think people are moving even away from relationships. I think we're just really that whole 2 kids, a house in the burbs thing, that idea is
kind of gone.
It's kind of gone. It's really archaic kind of at this point. I mean, some people do it, but it's a little more, it's fading, Yeah, let's round out this conversation by talking about that whole, how do you think the narrative of the two kids, house in the burbs, work your corporate job till you die narrative is impacting the idea of either impacting declining birth rates or this elitist idea of like more children the better, or we can replenish the earth,
I personally think that is kind of like that idea of work a corporate job, stay there for 15 years and things like that. That's kind of already gone. So I think the idea of childbearing is going with that because you just can't afford it. Like, it's as simple as I just can't afford it.
Yeah.
And so I just think the whole idea of what you should want and want to accomplish is, at this point, you're priced out. So there's a lot of things you just don't get if you're in the middle class or even lower class. And even if you're in like upper middle class, those people aren't even having a bunch of kids either. So it's telling. I can tell you that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just think this narrative is the backbone of, it's like it's on its last legs, you know? And so, of course, when something gets on its last legs, the people who believe in it are going to fight to keep it alive, you know? Like we've seen even with like the Trump movement. These people, they're on their last leg and they're fighting, you know? And I think this is it's not as big and apparent as the Trumps, but I think it's a part of that ideology of like, we need to keep what the tradition of like, we said the 2 kids house in the burbs kind of thing. We need to keep that alive because in some ways that also keeps our other conservative ideas alive you know? Yeah. And it's just interesting that these tech people who are synonymous with progression are trying to kind of reverting to that. But as we're learning, as we're learning and seeing things, the tech people are moving more and more towards a more conservative ideology. Like Elon Musk is kind of a conservative person, actually. Because there's, you know, and I think it's the influence of money and social power. Like they're aligning themselves more with older structures.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really think it's about maintaining power. And historically speaking, keeping kind of like the dumb to keep the rich kind of thing. It's what's happening. And so it benefits Elon Musk to be more conservative, whether he agrees or not, honestly.
Yeah.
Just because he can be big business, right?
He profits off of it.
Exactly. So here we are. And he, let's be honest, he needs the working class. He needs people to have more children so that he can keep the rich and the poor. So,
and it's having children is another form of keeping people, frankly, indebted to these bigger businesses. Because when you think about it, you got medical bills for a kid.
Yep.
Eventually, you have college costs for a kid. Those are all businesses tied to that. Vehicles cost for a kid. Schooling costs for children.
I want a bigger house, a better house, more space.
Yeah, people buy homes for children. It's like that grand narrative, like I was saying, are also tied to capitalistic industries that exist off of us believing that we need to have a certain kind of life when we do have children, right? So, yeah, that's it's all very interconnected, and it's just interesting now that like we're saying, the tech people are the new faces of this, because what it used to be like the Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan, Handmaid's Tale kind of look to it. And now it's like the Apple dude, the guy who runs Twitter, or like Google or whatever, is the face of these kinds of things, you know? So it's just it's very interesting to me, which is why I wanted to start writing about it, because I was like, this is it's oddly specific, but it's very probing, and I think it gets into bigger issues, as we've discussed here, you know? But yeah, it's I don't know. We'll see where things go. I mean, I won't be reproducing anytime soon. I'm always happy to be somebody's auntie. Yeah, or at all. I'm always happy to be auntie, though. So y'all have
the bunnies.
Kids.
Yep.
To the bunnies.
One's right there, not there.
Definitely happy to do that. Because, yeah, I don't even know if you're going to be an auntie to even animals for me. So, it tells you how far out of the reproductive lane I am.
Honestly. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening to this episode, and we hope to see you guys in the next one.
Yes, thanks for listening. See you next time.